crash. The latest has been the release of the cockpit findings, where we hear, "Did you switch off the fuel switch?" And the co-pilot replying, "No, I didn't." So does this mean that the guns now point to Boeing? So, sir, I'd first like to ask you about the cockpit design and engine. Where is the engine switch and the fuel switch placed in a Boeing cockpit?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, Rachel. And yes, everybody since morning and since last night at 1:30 a.m. when the this AAIB published the preliminary investigation report on this AI-171 crash. I think it throws more questions than answers in the report. And specific to your now, what the AIB has pointed is towards the specific case or specific toward the fuel control switches which are there in the cockpit, which actually controls the fuel to the engine. Okay, basically what it means is that when you put the switch to on or put the switch to off, it's a manually controlled spring-loaded switch which you has to be manually lifted, and it's a gated switch, guarded. You have to lift it against the spring, put it forward or put it back, off position or run position, and then it goes down and it gets locked or in its end. What it does is the moment you put it to off position on, you all know that it cut off the fuel supply and it basically shuts down it's called a fuel shut off valve. It means that obviously you all know what the valve is. So the moment it electronically gives the signal for switching off the fuel shut off valve, there is the shut off valve with the fuel goes to both engines, it shuts down. That means simultaneously stopping the fuel supply to the engines lines, every engine. They look to that left and right, one and two, not to both engines. It is depending upon the switch. If you shut down the one, it will go to the left engine. On the right side, it will go to the right engine. So we have got two fuel shut off. So the investigation has. So it's a very sketchy investigation, I would say. So that is these fuel cut off switches are located inside the cockpit of a Boeing 787, just below the thrust levers, or you can say the what you the how do I say it's a thrust lever there in the cockpit. Below that, on the central pedestal, they're located.
Right. So given the location and the fact that you say it's guarded, so obviously Boeing has put multiple protocols in place to make sure that it's not accidentally flipped on. I want to refer back to 1987 when there was a Delta Flight 810. There was a near crash where the Boeing 767 pilot, inadvertently shut both engines mid-flight because the switches were very placed pretty close to other switches that they were operating. So after that incident where the plane descended rapidly 1700 feet, they decided, Boeing did this whole redesign and said that we're going to make sure that nobody inadvertently touches the switch. So obviously none of the pilots doesn't this very fact make it that it might have been more Boeing than the pilot?
No, so the thing is, yes, the no sane pilot will actually put the switch off in the air. They know that the moment they put the switch off, the fuel supply will cut off to its respective engine. And not so in this crash. Just after the takeoff, 3 seconds or 4 seconds after takeoff, there was a commanded switch, which was also command. The thing is that the report doesn't say that the pilots did it or inadvertently or inadvertently, intentionally, and all these things regarding the midair or the inadvertently switching off. So there have been few incidents in the past, but in the midair, what happens is when you have one engine failure, the procedure or the protocol or the checklist says that you have to switch off the fuel supply of that particular engine before, and you have to put the throttle lever to idle, like what we do it in a car or something. We put it in the idle running of the engine, and you have to switch off the fuel supply because the engine has failed. There has been time in India also, I think, with Go Air, if I remember, once it happened. It's inadvertently the other engine was switched off. That leads to that will lead to the both engine failure. One is already gone due to some mechanical failure or something, and the healthy engine was the switch was instead of, because even if you switch off the engine which is already gone, that means there's a failure. You're just preventing some kind of fuel. So even if you keep it on, nothing will happen. But the healthy engine switch was switched off. That must have been the case in the what the Boeing 767. No pilot will deliberately or switch off these two fuel control switches. Inadvertently, that is why these guards and these brackets are there in a Dreamliner heavy aircraft. That even if you want to pull it down or something, it will not, because there's a locking mechanism in there. Physically, you have to lift it out of the gate and then bring it back, and then just leave it. It goes down into the gate. So it's very difficult that, inadvertently, unless what the Air India crash also points out, there's some service bulletin of Boeing, but that was later on, in the recommendation of that service bulletin, they said it is not for the team. So
Yeah,
it's
right.
wide
So
open.
these are okay. So these are highly trained pilots, right? And they would have had a very rigorous checklist, and because this is soon after takeoff, so they will be like, so the first officer is flying, and it was the captain who was probably looking at the checklist. So the preliminary data shows that the slats were deployed at a very unusual angle, and the landing gear failed to retract after takeoff. So this points more to a possible hydraulic or mechanical failure, right? So given the rigorous checklist, that these pilots do at takeoff, do you think it's more on Boeing than the pilots?
See, it's very easy to put a blame to the pilot directly. Okay, and now and in the most of the crashes, the pilots are not there to defend themselves. The first thing, that's what I feel. Again, my own personal views. What AIB has done is just given one information about the fuel control switches, which they know that they cannot move on their own unless it has been moved by the pilots. So that they have shifted the entire thing to the pilot rather than to the Boeing, or there is some fault with the switches or the fault with the engines prior to switch being commanded. That thing has been left open. Coming to the point of the hydraulic and all these failures, this theory has already been, has been discarded now, since the crash has seen that the flaps were at right position, the landing gear lever was down because it happened 4 seconds after the liftoff. When you and there is no checklist at the time of takeoff. It's all by memory, because at that point of time you're not looking inside looking for a checklist. The pilot monitoring is looking at the
It's on
instrument.
auto. It's just in your mind. The checklist, you're going
Yes,
boom,
so
boom,
that
boom.
there are something called a memory items for every critical situation that pilot have to memorize and take the actions. The checklist comes later on when, like for example, engine failure. The initial actions are by memory. Once the aircraft is settled in the air and it is away from the ground, then the checklist comes out by the pilot monitoring, and then the pilot monitoring reads out and do the, it's called a challenge and response procedure. It cannot done on its own, right? So in this crash, particular, so these theories have been ruled out. So the lever was down because there was no enough time for the pilots to take the gear up, because it was a sort of startled effect of failing the engine or something. Well, that's again, because the report says that the fuel switches were commanded or transition phase. That means they physically moved. That is the point which is, troubling everyone, that how us anybody at that critical time when the aircraft is taking off 4 seconds will move it. The cockpit CVR, only one line has been released. Why did it put it off? Why did you put it off? Who's pilot saying this? Whether that has not been clear, that the AIB has not brought out. I know for the very maybe the reasons, though, again the speculations, because the every pilot has got a different mic. Their recordings are separate. You can make out which mic has been operated. Okay, which intercom has been operated? As who is speaking? Is the left seat speaking or the right seat speaking? That everything is possible in an aircraft, but that has not been brought out by the AIB. That which pilot said, "Why did you switch it off?" The pilot flying was on the right seat, that is the co-pilot. The pilot monitoring was on the left seat. He was also the pilot in command and the captain of the aircraft. But who did the switch off? Because again, it was put back. That is what the flight data recorder said. That again, it was put back. It was put off and put back. That situation happens only at a one point in the air, when you have a dual engine failure because of any mechanical failure or any kind of fuel starvation or of something of that. So we cannot rule out engine malfunction. We cannot, give a clean check to Boeing or something. No, it has not been given. So if that thing happens, then is the only way when the pilots move both the fuel control switches to back off and back. It is basically a recycling to relight the engines. That is
Right,
the procedure, right? So
right.
anybody's guess.
So, this Boeing, the Dreamliner, doesn't it have a fly-by-wire system? So, the fly-by-wire essentially ensures that the aircraft still flies even without the pilot. So, that means that the software can take over at some point, right? Which has, huh?
Sorry, to cut off in between. Fly-by-wire doesn't
No,
mean
I was asking you
fly-by-wire.
about the fly-by-wire. How because there's fly-by-wire in place in the Dreamliner, because this was not the MCAS. The MCAS was the one which led to the Lion crash. So since this has fly-by-wire, even the fly-by-wire does have at certain points it can override the pilot, right?
Uh, no, it is something. Fly-by-wire per se means that the normal aircraft is flight control systems, whether it is a yoke or wheel or it's a anything or a stick or something. They're connected to the flight control through a chain and pulleys, physically connected. When you move it physically through a system of chains and the pulleys, the controls moves. In a fly-by system, fly-by-wire, it is the electronic signals which go. There is no physical connection of the stick or the yoke to the control surfaces which are moving. So that signal goes to the motor. The computer moves the motor, runs the motor. The motor runs the hydraulic motor, moves the, uh, the flight controls. So that is the called as the fly-by-wire system with its computer. So that is why it is pre-commanded that even if pilots want to fully, put the up or go out of the flight envelope, we call it, the computer will not allow the control surfaces to go beyond a certain limit that has been already in a flyby in all the flight management systems of the Airbus or Boeing.
Right. So, for instance, if a pilot wanted to take the nose up too high or nose too deep, then the fly-by-wire would ensure that it's balanced. But
Not
I'm
the
also
fly,
wanting to
flight
know if the fly-by-wire could be the one that has caused the mistake.
No, this is see the thing is the now all the speculation, and we should not speculate all these things because
Okay.
all these theories have been put to rest by the AIB that there's nothing wrong with the system. It is the engine which has failed. See, the aircraft going down means that there is no thrust in the aircraft. There is no lift. The lift of the aircraft gets its lift through its thrust to its engines. When the engines are not there, the
So,
aircraft.
couldn't you stall like if the plane doesn't have thrust, if it's stalling, then it's also possible because the nose is too high, too deep. It could be any number of things, right? It's not just the engines, right?
So it depends. It depends. If the aircraft, even if the engines are running smoothly and everything is fine, even if you want, if you can install the yes, but there are some in all the aircraft. They are you cannot like for example Airbus 320 which I fly. You cannot stall the aeroplane. Even if you put it fully nose up, the warnings will keep coming in. And at some certain point of time, the speed goes below certain value. There will be an auto thrust which will open and will open without even you moving the thrust lever. The FedEx, which is called the fully automatic digital engine control, will move the engine, thrust forward to give you thrust so that you don't stop. So
So, in
these
the
are very
final seconds before the crash, how many things would have been hitting the pilot? That every alarm would have been screaming, right? Like, so how many indications would have been going off the cockpit at that point? Just the last 30 seconds
It
before the
is,
crash.
failure of the engines, failure of the master warning for the hydraulic system, failure of the electrical systems, all the warnings which are there concerned with the electrical, with the hydraulic, with the engine, definitely. The but I am quite certain these warnings definitely again will not come. You see, there was a complete power failure after that because the engine uh, runs the generator. Generator gives the electricity. Okay, so these are the this is what the main electrical system in the aircraft. When the engine fails, there is this backup system of the auxiliary power engine or the unit we call it, and a ram air turbine. It is the last resort which drives the electric. It gives the power to the systems, primarily to the displays, to the pilot, and to the control system, so they can fly the aircraft. It doesn't, that doesn't mean that the if the engines are running, it doesn't mean that electrical system will come online. It will happen at times that even if the engines are running, there is a power failure because the generators can fail. Okay, if the generator fails, so then the backup electricity comes on engine and everything fine. So these are basically it's Boeing 787 is a fully electric. So it relies more on the electrics rather than on the the bleed system or the air system. So at the
Right.
end, the aircraft was about to crash. Definitely, the power would have come on because the RAD got deployed, but there was no thrust or not enough power generation or the hydraulic power available to the aircraft to get the gear up or do something.
Right, got it, sir. So now, can I ask you a non-technical question? This has more to do with culture. So I feel there's been a culture of blame ever since the Lion Air 610 crash, where there was the Indian pilot, Mr. Bhave Suneja, Captain Bhave Suneja, and Boeing failed to inform the pilots about the MCAS system, and they tried to say that, like, it couldn't have happened to an American pilot. And actually, Captain Suneja had trained in the US. So time and again, we have seen in Boeing crashes, Boeing instance, that there's been this idea of wanting to blame non-white pilots. So can you respond to that?
So I, I will not, because since I don't have, but yes, the Boeing, every, Boeing would like to come out clean out of this. We have to ask questions to the Boeing. You can't give a clean check to Boeing that, and you can't put the blame on the pilots. Yes, Boeing definitely will try to come out, or GE electrical engine. They say that everything is fine with us, and they will put the blame onto the pilots. That's I said the opening sentence here. The first thing everyone would like to do is the pilot would have done something. And the AIB preliminary report also just says what happened. It did not say why it happened and how it happened and what was. It says what happened. What happened is the moment they give only one indication of yes, fuel control switches, point out that nobody else, even the I would say a software glitch will not move the fuel control switches automatically from run to off. It has to be physically moved either intentionally or it is inadvertently if there is a locking mechanism which has failed because of again it comes point to the manufacturer and to the Air India itself, the company, whether the service bulletin which was brought out, though it was not again relevance directly may or may not to this crash because in the end they said there was some reports that this locking mechanism if that is failed, so this switches can be moved without even lifting the lever, without lifting this. It's not a light on off switch where you just on off switch it. You have to physically lift the switch. If the local mechanism is failed, so without even lifting the switch, you can put it back. But yes, automatically it will not. It has to be physically moved. That is the thing.
Right.
One has also a lot to answer on this.
Okay. So, can I ask you about the timeline realities, given that it happened within within seconds? So, given the condensed timeline, barely seconds after powered flight, how realistic is it that the pilots could manually have triggered a shutdown? See, because they're also managing liftoff, and it's critical during takeoff that they would have been engaged just in takeoff. So do you think this aspect, the fact that the failure happened within such short notice of takeoff, does this point to more systems like that Boeing
Yes.
system malfunction more than human error? Would you put it
I
at, give me a percentage, like 70%, like it's less than 5% human error? Can you give me a percentage on Boeing versus the pilot?
I no. The thing is, yes. See, what I'm saying is that it is very, very unrealistic. No pilot will do
Yeah,
this. It will not happen
yeah. I
because
mean, people would have to be insane to kind of
oh, yes,
pull
yes,
off
it
the
has to
dual
be
switch.
done. No sane pilot will do this. And at the time of this critical takeoff, none of the pilots hands are there on the central pedestal where the switches are there. The pilot flying hands are on the wheel. The pilot monitoring hands are also, on the wheel, following. It's a control in case the failure or something. He's just following on controls to the. And definitely in this case, pilot flying was a co-pilot. So pilot monitoring was a PIC. Must be his hands also must be on the job. So nobody. It's a very very unrealistic that within 1 second both the control switches would move physically run to off. It's highly unrealistic. It's the only thing I said in this 4 seconds, and the CVR also this one single line put so many questions. Okay, what exactly has happened? Why there was no CVR again? Maybe because AIB must have sought because of the it's just a preliminary stage wherein they have put on the DFDR data timelines. Had they put some more CVR, recording, then it would have been much clearer which pilot spoke, whether it was the left or the right team, right? So as far as the realistics and the percentage goes, I would say 100% nobody will do it. Nobody
Right.
will risk doing it.
Yeah, sure. So I want to end this on a more casual note because given the tragedy and everything. So in 1989, there was this United Airlines flight 811. It was a Boeing 747, and it was en route from Honolulu to Auckland. When disaster struck, like a cargo door blew off, and then the cabin caved in. And when the cabin caved in, debris flew everywhere, and the debris hit the engines, and then the engine caught fire. So because of this, so for a lay person, people don't understand why there is a fuel switch. Because today I was asked, hey, in the car we don't have like a fuel switch to turn it off. But in airplanes, see, because when you're driving a car, you just have an engine switch. You don't have anything special to turn the fuel off. So for a lay person, can you tell us why the fuel switch exists? I know that the fuel switch exists, when in case people have to do a belly landing, and they don't want fuel which will, the plane will go up in flames if the landing gear is not retracting and it tries to do a belly landing with a full tank. So people try to dump fuel if they know that they're going to have a rough landing. So can you explain this concept of how planes try to dump fuel in case of an emergency, and why the fuel switches are in place in an aircraft before we close?
What does your in a car in there is no fuel? How do you switch off your vehicle?
So
What happens when you switch off? What happens when you switch off your vehicle? Okay, in a
okay.
car, switch off your vehicle with the key. Something is you are moving.
Yes.
Something you're switching off. You're switching off the electrical supply. It's piston engine in the car. Okay,
Yes.
it's not a turbine engine, right? So turbine
Mm.
engine, how do you stop a turbine engine? By shutting off the fuel supply. Okay, in a
Mhm.
piston engine, what do you do? You switch off the electrical supply. Okay,
Mhm.
and that's what there is no turbine which is moving. You have to switch off the fuel supply for the turbine to stop moving. Okay, so that is why the engines are switched on and switched off, primarily giving the fuel supply on and fuel supply off, because engines have to run continuously with fuel supply. All right, so that is why you have fuel switches in the aircraft. And secondly, in case you need to switch off one engine in the air when the engine has got faulty, what do? You don't want the fuel to spill or something. There is a fuel leakage. You have to stop. How will you stop the fuel? Right. So that is why, in case there is a fuel leakage, in case something happens, you switch off that engine fuel. In case there is a fuel leakage from the tank, in case there is a fuel leak from the engine, how do you do that? You switch off the main fuel supply to the engine. That is why the fuel switches are there. Because that's one thing which will. So in a car, you are in two-dimensional world. You're on the earth. You can switch off and get out of the car, and So in the air, what happens to avoid any fire, any explosion because of the fuel? The first thing is you switch off the fuel supply, so that the chances of an explosion with the fuel and this, that is minimized. The fuel dumping can take place. That's a different thing, because fuel dumping is to get the weight of the aircraft below a certain landing weight. Otherwise, what will happen if you land above the aircraft as designed? But too much of above landing weight will have put a stress on the undercarriage on the landing. It might collapse. Okay, so that is why there is a limitation given to every aircraft that this is the maximum landing weight. If you have to land, there are additional checks. But even if you are above certain majority, you have to dump the fuel if you have time. Else, you have to. In case there is an engine of fire, that depends upon the emergency situation. It cannot be generalized there. That is why you have checklists, that you have standard operating procedures for every phase of the flight and for every emergency or incidents what we have or what we face in the cockpit. So this is all laid down. We follow SOPs, we follow our checklist. If you follow the checklist given by the manufacturer, we follow the checklist and SOP given by the regulator, we follow everything given by the company. Everything is laid down. It's not that the pilot decides on its own.
Right, sir. So the last few seconds, the fact that like they had not called out that it was an emergency means that they were still trying to deal with the incident, right? The pilots, like based on what the one lone survivor is saying, that they were trying hands on to deal with it. And also that like something like a checklist, like you say, is still not possible in such a scenario with just split seconds after takeoff, right? So at this point, like there's nothing a human could have possibly done to have saved the craft at that juncture if it's descending within 45 seconds of takeoff.
I'm sure they must have done. They must have followed
Done
procedure.
everything possible in their this,
So
but
whatever
still.
the SOP says in that point of time, and they must have done their best to recover the aircraft. And but the fact still remains that if you don't have the engines, so aircraft will, and being a very heavy aircraft just taken off, so they would have tried their level best to recover the airplane, but unfortunately, I mean, because of the loss of the thrust, loss of lift.
Okay.
That is the list
Thank you
of
so
one.
much. Yes. Thank you so much, sir. It was amazing having you on board, and it was such a technical discussion, which all of us enjoyed. So thank you so much here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.